Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Jack Kimberling was an exceptional alumnus, supporter, and friend, a truly cherished friend of our law school and our university. I'm so pleased that you are all here this afternoon to join us in celebrating him and honoring his memory and his legacy at Indiana University. In particular, I would like to recognize Jack's nieces, Jane Fredgant and Julie Spencer, who have traveled from California to be with us this afternoon. And also Larry Wilkinson, Jack's cousin, and his wife Myra. To begin our program this afternoon, I would like to invite Kurt Simic, President Emeritus of the Foundation, to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm really very honored to be here. It's a pleasure. When I was still at Berkeley and I got the appointment that I would be here, I saw that there were 3 new members of the board of directors that were about to be appointed. And I thought, well, I'll act like a big shot. I would write them a letter and invite them to be sure and say yes. And so I discovered this man from Palm Springs named Jack Kimberling, and I wrote and I asked him if he would please accept the appointment at the foundation board. And of course he did. So he and I came on board at the IU Foundation at the same time. It was the summer of 1988. And I learned in a hurry that he wasn't really from Palm Springs or Los Angeles. He was from Rushville. And that's where he grew up and got his passion for basketball. And you can imagine the conversations we had about IU basketball coaches over the years. Bob Knight, a lot to talk about there. Mike Davis, Calvin Sampson, and Tom Cruise. And Tom actually has conditional approval from Jack for the time being now, so it's on its way. But as we both prepared for the first foundation board meeting, we both vowed that we would be quiet. We would listen. We would see who led the discussions. We would see where the leadership was. But most of all, we would keep our mouths shut. We both failed, as you'd expect. At the end of the semester, just a couple of weeks before the meeting, there were some legal actions concerning some IU Foundation employees. Without going into any details, the question, the foundation indemnified these 3 for legal fees, etc. Well, there were 2 schools of thought, both advocated by some of the most respected and articulate members of the foundation board. On one side was Ed Kelly and Danny Danielson. On the other side was Dan James and Neil Gilliatt. And if you remember those 4, it was a good debate. So there was quite a bit of drama. There was quite a bit of rhetoric. And after several hours of debate and a night's sleep and more debate in the offing, in rides this wallflower from Palm Springs with the answer. And it was one of those common sense proposals that the Jack was so typical about. It was a common sense proposal. It made good sense that everybody could enjoy. And I assumed and I ascribed it to his roots in Indiana and Rushville in particular. It was the perfect solution. And as the matters played out, the charges were thrown out and life went on peacefully. But in my mind, Jack Kimberling emerged as one of those go-to people on the board. Something I did often over the next 20 years. He helped shape and then led the campaign for endowed chairs and professorships that moved IU from last in the Big Ten to first in the Big Ten. And the numbers went from 70 endowed positions to 460 endowed positions through that campaign. He was the co-chair of that academic endowment campaign with Barbara Jacobs. There's another person who's made an indelible mark at IU. And the other co-chairs were Danny Danielson and Bill Carmichael, 2 other people who continue to make their leadership felt across the university. One of the very important campaigns he led for the law school, of course, was the one that he co-chaired with Mickey Maurer. And if you'll recall, the 2 of them were very effective in making that work, Laura, as you'll remember. Later, when Mickey was considering the naming gift, I know he consulted with Jack. I know they talked about it. He talked about how this might work. It's also true that Jack could apply his energy and resources in ways that were slightly mercurial shall we say. There was a time he was pulled over for running a red light in Los Angeles, and he didn't wait his turn. He didn't go when the light turned in his favor. He just made the turn and ripped on out of there and was pulled over. Well, when he saw the price tag on the ticket, he decided that he would take as many of his associates as it took in the law firm and study whether or not there was a disproportionate number of traffic tickets given to people who were driving red cars. Well, he was pretty sure what the answer was that he wanted, and so he was pushing along on that. But as it turned out, he didn't do the research. They didn't do the research, and nothing came of it except for one thing. It gave him license to say he was right. We talked about it. The last time I saw him, by the way, I was in California, I think after Thanksgiving a year ago, and we visited. And the car he was driving was a very sporty Mercedes convertible, white in color. By the way. Well, at the memorial gathering at his home last winter that Jane and Julie and others organized, people from each walk of his life that he befriended, that he advocated for, and that he mentioned, all had this same feeling about him. The stories were many, but the theme was always the same: wise, caring, thoughtful solutions and strategies for situations. And those who spoke covered 4 generations. This was what was so impressive to me. His own generation, junior colleagues, and then nephews and nieces, and then grandnephews and nieces were a part of it. There were 4 generations who were talking about him in the conversation. That love for Jack, the respect for Jack, and the gratitude to him suffused every single comment. He was an activist for just treatment for everyone in every facet of their lives, public, professional, or private. He was their champion. Now, I didn't find Jack a particularly religious man, despite what the papal gown looks like here, in a formal and organized sense. I didn't find that. But I do think that Jack realized that God didn't have any real hands on earth except yours, except his and ours. And I think his hands were very busy all the time, making the world a better place for everybody. I value the memories and the lessons he gave me. I'm grateful for his leadership in IU's best endeavors. Students in the future won't know him, but without knowing them, Jack has enriched every one of their lives. He made me, like so many others, a friend, a colleague, and his grateful pupil. The Foundation Board, tomorrow in its session, will have a resolution that J.B. Hunt will present to the board, and we have reasonable confidence that it will pass. But here it is. Whereas John F. Jack Kimberling shared his peerless wisdom, dedication, counsel, unselfish, and carefully crafted reactions and remarkable generosity with Indiana University, its foundation, and the Maurer School of Law for his entire lifetime. And whereas he grew up in Rushville and graduated from IU Bloomington in 1947 following service in the U.S. Navy. A campus leader both as an undergraduate and in the law school, he received his law degree from IU in 1950. And whereas, after he again answered his country's call as a naval officer, he entered into a celebrated career in the Los Angeles area, which brought him unprecedented laurels in civic leadership and as an attorney until his passing this year, and where he was cited as one of the top jury trial lawyers in the nation by his peers. And whereas his devotion and service to the Maurer School of Law included membership on the Board of Visitors, being a fellow in the Academy of Law alumni, he made generous gifts, and being a visiting professor for a number of years. And whereas his university accolades included the Distinguished Alumni Service Award given to him in 2001, when you were here, Larry, for that event. And whereas Jack's invaluable service on the board of directors of the IU Foundation spanned 25 eventful years, ending only by his passing, and included being the national co-chair of the landmark 2000 endowment campaign, and keenly perceptive participation as a member of the foundation committees. And whereas Jack's unique vision and effectiveness were employed at several moments in the life of the university and the foundation where his expertise was essential in abiding resolution of those matters. And whereas, following his much-deserved retirement from his former law practice, he served the Palm Springs community with the same passion and brilliance that were evident in his prior associations. And whereas he never lost his fervent love for Indiana University, his alma mater, and its outstanding service in teaching, research, and the pursuit of the public good, now therefore be it resolved that we, the Board of Directors of the IU Foundation, warmly salute his exemplary life and extend to his family our deep sense of loss at Jack's passing and our profound gratitude for a life exceedingly well lived. I keep thinking he's up there saying, listen to all those whereases. All over the place. Frank Gilkison, his classmate in the law school from Muncie, has joined us, and we look forward to hearing from you, Frank. You're really nice.
Thank you, Kurt. Provost Laura and Dean Hannah Huxold and assembled people who are here in honor of my old friend Jack Kimberling. We were in the same class, and in fact he was I'll put it this way, I'm 1 year older, or 1 month older than Jack, and he is 2 months older than another classmate whose name is Kenneth McFarland Smith. And if you look at your invitations to this particular meeting, you will, it's not in the program, but it's in the invitation, and all right, here there's a picture of Jack looking over the shoulder of another student, and that is Kenneth McFarland Smith, who was Brother Phi for me, and who became my lifelong friend until he died 5 years ago. Kenneth was from Kokomo, and he distinguished himself in the state as a lawyer in the state of Virginia, and Arlington grew up around him. He lit there in 1953, and when he got out of the service in the Korean War. So I wanted to identify him because lots of people would look at that and wonder, well, who's that guy with Jack? And that's who it was. They were moot court partners, I think, and I think that's why the picture was taken. But the class of 1950 matriculated to law school in 1947, in September. And I can take you back in time. Then that was exactly 1 month and 2 years after the end of World War II. And there was a lot of blue smoke on the streets from the mostly old cars who were 1930 models that were about all that was available at that time. And they're still holding up. There were some new cars. They were few and far between, and they looked just like the 1941 models. Because the automobile companies had a terrible time transitioning from building tanks and bombers back to building cars again. But the class that matriculated in 1947 was a diverse group of men. And I emphasize men because there were no women in the class. And of course that glaring deficiency has long since been corrected, much for the great betterment of the profession. And but almost all of the members of the class were veterans of World War II. Otis Allen was the oldest guy in our class. He was from Mount Vernon, Indiana, and he was 42 years old. And he had been in the real estate title business as an abstractor and a title searcher for 10 years or more before he was in the service. And of course, he did get an A in property. So, but I'm an old lawyer, and I brought my yellow tablet along just to prove that. I didn't bring any wireless digital device with me. The class of 1950 produced a lot of good lawyers, most of them in this state, but not all. And in fact, at one point, I don't know, I got the list out and found that, looked in Martindale and found that 4 members of that class were inducted into the American College of Trial Lawyers, which is by invitation only. And one of those, of course, was Jack Kimberling. One was Fred Link of Hammond, Indiana. One was Jim Pankow of South Bend. And the other one was me. So, but there were lots of other good lawyers there, to my knowledge, from our class. Besides myself, there are 2 other men living. One is Ralph E. Dennis, who is a colleague of mine in Muncie and has practiced there exactly the same amount of time as I have. And the other one is Philip Judge Harris in Warsaw, Indiana. And so, if there are others who are still living, I don't have any way to figure that out. But in any event, it was a hard-working group because most of the veterans were eager to learn fast and get on their way. And Jack and I and Kenny Smith and three other Phi-Psis who were in law school with us, well, we wanted to get through law school and get going, but we didn't have the same feel that a lot of the fellows who'd been in the service for 3 or 4 years. That made a lot of difference. Some of them had to come back and even finish their undergrad before they came to law school. So, in any event, we did graduate, and one of the big events before our graduation, and Jack was there, and I, and all of it, we filled the room for Dean Gavitt's final lecture on procedure. He taught the course on procedure. And Indiana at that time had a unique unique procedure. Now we have the same as the federal rules in all but a few instances. But he was a great teacher. He was a small man, but he had a large voice. And on the last day of school, or last day of classes, he was telling us about trying lawsuits. And of course, he went into just the basics. That's all you could do. Talked about how you can have 3 challenges to the juror without any shown cause, and it's in the statute. And he didn't tell you that you don't want to be too loose with that sometimes, because you may get in a hole and not have any uncontested challenges left. But when he got through with all of that, talking about trial procedure and how to try cases, somebody raised his hand and said, "Dean," he said, what happens when I get a case my first 3 months, and it's a really good case, and I have to take it, and I do, and it turns in that we're going to have a jury trial?" And he says, "I haven't had any experience." And the dean had said before that, well, you gain these things by experience. And he said, "But I don't have any. What do I do?" And the dean looked at him and in his clipped tone said, "Well, you'll simply have to hire yourself an experienced lawyer." True. That brought the house down, really did. I was going to talk a little bit about Jack, when he graduated, there are two venerable firms in Muncie that are still there, actually. One was Bracken, Gray and DeFur, and the other was White and Haymond. And when Jack graduated, he became an associate of Bracken, Gray and DeFur, and now known as DeFur Varan. And I became an associate of White and Haymond, which is now known as Beasley and Gilkison. But they're both can trace back to the turn of the century. And the building that they were in was built for the two firms. And Bracken Gray had the west end and White and Haymond had the east end. And Jack and I saw each other almost daily. We had to go up the same stairway. He turned left and I turned right. And so we had been well acquainted before, but we became even better. He was worried then. He'd been in the Naval Reserve, and he was worried that he was going to get recalled. And there was a basis for that worry because he was recalled I think it was in the spring of 1951. So when he was released from the Navy in 1953, he made a decision which formed his life. And he became an associate with a big firm in L.A., Lillick, Mikos, and Charles. And all this is in your program, so I'm not going to go through it in any great detail. But he became, over a period of years, he became a partner in 10 years, became the managing partner before he left, and during that time he developed great litigating skills. And he did this in one of the most competitive markets in the country. It was after World War II, and probably the Southern California area had more economic activity or as much as any other large population center in this country. And so he was competing with tough people, tough lawyers on the other side. And he developed himself during that time. And as we know, he retired at 60, and then Dewey Ballantyne, which at that time was a iconic New York City firm, had a big branch in Los Angeles, and they relieved Jack of his retirement, I'm sure at reasonable consideration, and he became the chairman of their litigation department, and was active again in his trying mostly a lot of big lawsuits and with big consequences and involved. I have called him, or would call him, a uniquely distinguished lawyer, in the sense that there are a lot of distinguished lawyers. There are a lot of great trial lawyers, but Jack probably had developed himself that he was a cut above even the what we would call a great lawyer. He did this under really the toughest conditions with the competition that he had. But one thing about it, he never forgot his Hoosier roots, as we know. And in addition to the great material wealth with which he's bestowed upon the university and the law school, he came here in person and bestowed his knowledge firsthand to the students who were lucky enough to be in his presence and be in his class on how to try lawsuits. Because when we graduated, there wasn't much about that. The dean was right. you had to talk to an experienced lawyer if you were going to learn anything about it. And as it turned out, Jack became the experienced lawyer that Dean Gavitt was talking about. And because he could talk about the nuances that only a person who's been there and done that would know or know how to execute. And so his contributions to the law school and the university were great, and he was a great person. And we were fortunate, I was fortunate to know him. I didn't see him a lot in his later years, but once in a while, I think the last time I saw him, I ran, Kenny Smith and I were here, and we ran into Jack in the bookstore. So we had a meeting there. So, thankfully, the material in your program has shortened my speech a whole lot, and that's good for all of us. And so at this time, it is my privilege to introduce Provost and former Dean Lauren Robel, who will proceed with the program.
Do I contradict myself? Then I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. Ever since I started thinking about this evening, or this afternoon, and thinking about talking about Jack Kimberling, those words from Leaves of Grass have been going through my head. Because Jack contained multitudes. He was multidimensional, and he was just about limitless. If he had a limit, I don't know that any of us ever saw it. As Frank has said, he had a fine, incisive, probing, and engaged mind that brings to mind actually another Whitman poem, facing west from California's shore, inquiring, tireless, seeking what is yet unfound. That was Jack. He was passionate about so many things. He was passionate about public policy. He used that fine mind to write books, and you think about the fact that a couple of months before he passed away, he was publishing Huffington Post columns that were being retweeted, sometimes by him, and that had been liked 375,000 times the last time I looked. He was iconoclastic, individualistic. That intellect was always seeking an uncommon way, a third way. He was adventurous. Need I say more than the motorcycles? Or the fact that he won a senior motorcycle award at some point in his life, or we could talk about the whitewater rafting, or it just goes on and on. The little fast cars that I was so honored to have ridden in a few times. He appreciated beauty. He had a refined and expansive aesthetic sensitivity. And he became an accomplished sculptor late in his life. He was generous and philanthropic, and he set everybody's sights high. Fred Amon told me when he was dean that Jack insisted that the top spot on our donor board that we hadn't yet gotten to, the $10 million spot, be put on the donor board, empty. Because he knew someone was going to get there if that was put there. He allowed us to set up the Kimberling Society so that people would be inspired to make planned gifts to the law school. And there are over 200 people in that society now. And that was Jack. He was smart about philanthropy, and he understood its power. to change lives and to do good in the world. He was really funny and fun and fiercely loyal to his friends and most of all to Indiana University and the Maurer School of Law, and of course, to his beloved family. I have this picture of him. Kurt mentioned that Mickey Maurer, who provided that gift that Jack was looking at, and I suspect knew was coming from Mickey even many years before. I have this vision of the two of them walking away from the close of our capital campaign at the law school. The two of them walking down a hall in the Union Building. And they were slightly different sized human beings. And Jack had his arm around Mickey like this and was scheming. They were scheming for what was going to happen next. You know, Robert Rogers, in a 1758 book called Rules for Ranging, this is about ranging over hostile territory, wrote, "Signs and countersigns should be established to determine your friends in the dark." We're all Jack's friends, and he established those signs and countersigns, and his friends were never in the dark about his friendship, his loyalties, his passions, and his views. Let me raise a glass and ask you all to as well. To Jack, our fiercely passionate, iconoclastic, our deeply, deeply giving friend for a beautifully lived and beautifully shared life. To you. Well, thank you all for being here. It's so wonderful to have you here. He spoke so many times about you. It's hard to believe I won't be making that drive out through the desert to Palm Springs anymore. But we have him in our hearts, and we have more memories than we know what to do with, and maybe we can take this time now to spend time with each other and share those memories. Thank you.